Welcome back to Dragonwings, everyone. Last time we read Moonshadow, Windrider, and Windrider went to the Festival of Pure Brightness, and that is when they go and they honor their dead, and something special happened when they went to the festival. Windrider and Uncle finally made up, and they got to see all the guys from the company, and it seemed like they had a really good time. But when they were celebrating the dead Moonshadow at the very end, when we were reading yesterday, he started to think about death and how quickly it can come and just how surprising it can be. And just, how everything can just be gone in a flash. And that's where he leaves us on page 196. He says, "I was not far from wrong." So that kind of leads us to believe that something bad is about to happen. So let's see what happens today. Again, we're on page 196, towards the bottom where it says, "It was 13 days." It was 13 days after the Feast of Pure Brightness that the earthquake hit. Just a little after 5 a.m. demon time, I had gotten dressed and gone out to the pump to get some water. The morning was filled with that soft, gentle twilight of spring, when everything is filled with soft, dreamy colors and shapes. So when the earthquake hit, I did not believe it at first. It seemed like a nightmare, where everything you take to be the rock-hard, solid basis for reality becomes unreal. Wood and stone and brick and the very earth became fluid-like. The pail beneath the pump jumped and rattled like a spider dancing on a hot stove. The ground deliberately seemed to slide right out from under me. I landed on my back, hard enough to drive the wind from my lungs. The whole world had become unglued. Our stable and Miss Whitlaw's house and the tenements to either side heaved and bobbed up and down, riding the ground like ships on a heavy sea. Down the alley mouth, I could see the cobblestone street undulate and twist like a red-backed snake. From inside our stable, I could hear the cups and plates begin to rattle on their shelves, and the equipment on Father's work table clattered and rumbled ominously. Suddenly the door banged open and Father stumbled out with his clothes all in a bundle. "It's an earthquake, I think," he shouted. He had washed his hair the night before and had not had time to twist it back into a queue, so it hung down from his back, long and black. He looked around in the backyard. It was such a wide, open space that we were fairly safe there, certainly more safe than in the framed doorway of our stable. He got into his pants and shirt, and then his socks and boots. "Do you think one of the mean dragons is doing all this?" I asked him. Maybe not." Father had sat down to stuff his feet into his boots. "Time to wonder about that later. Now you wait here." He started to get to his feet when the second tremor shook and he fell forward flat on his face. I heard the city bells ringing. They were rung by no human hand. The earthquake had just shaken them in their steeples. The second tremor was worse than the first. From all over came an immense wall of noise, of metal tearing, of bricks crashing, of wood breaking free from wood nails and all. Everywhere, what man had built came undone. I was looking at a tenement house to our right, and it just seemed to shudder and then collapse. One moment there were solid wooden walls, and the next moment it had fallen with the cracking of wood and the tinkling of glass and the screams of people inside. Mercifully, for a moment, it was lost to view in the cloud of dust that rose up. The debris surged against Miss Whitlaw's fence and toppled it over with a creak and a groan and a crash. I saw an arm sticking up from the mound of rubble, and then the hand was twisted in an impossible angle from the wrist. Coughing, Father pulled at my arm. "Stay here now," he ordered, and started for Miss Whitlaw's. I turned. Her house was still standing, but the tenement house to the left had partially collapsed. The wall on our side and part of the front and back had just fallen down, revealing the apartments within, the laundry hanging from lines, the old brass beds, and a few lucky, if astonished, people just looking out dazedly on what had once been walls. I could see Jack sitting up in the bed with his two brothers. His mother and father were standing by the bed holding on to Macy. Their whole family crowded into a tiny 2-room apartment. Then they were gone, disappearing in a cloud of dust and debris as the walls and the floor collapsed. Father held me as I cried. Miss Whitlaw came out onto her porch in her nightdress and a shawl. She pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Are you all right?" "Yes," Father said, patting me on the back. "Aren't we, Moonshadow?" "Yes." I wiped my eyes on my sleeves. "Is everyone okay inside?" Father asked Miss Whitlaw. She nodded. We joined her on the porch and walked with her into her house. Robin was sitting on the stairs that led up to the second floor. She huddled up, looking no longer like the noisy, boisterous girl I knew. The front door was open before her. She must have gone outside to look. Just about the whole street's gone. From up the stairs, we could hear the querulous old voices of the boarders, demanding to know what had happened. Miss Whitlaw shouted up the stairs, "Everything's all right." "Are you sure?" Father asked quietly. Miss Whitlaw laughed. "From top to bottom, Papa always built well. He said he wanted a house that could hold a herd of thundering elephants. That was what he always called Mama's folks. He never liked them much." "It's gone," Robin repeated. "Just about the whole street's gone." "Oh, really now?" Miss Whitlaw walked past Robin. We followed her out the front door to the front porch. But Robin was right. No one had constructed the houses along the street as well as Miss Whitlaw's father had built his. A strange, eerie silence hung over the city. The bells had stilled in their steeples, and houses had stopped collapsing momentarily. It was as if the city itself were holding its breath. Then we could hear the hissing of gas from the broken pipes like dozens of angry snakes, and people trapped inside the mounds began calling. Their voices sounded faint and ghostly, as if dozens of ghosts floated over the rubble, crying in little distant voices for help. Robin and I pressed close to one another for comfort. It was Miss Whitlaw who saved us. It was she who gave us something important to do and brought us out of shock. She pressed her lips together for a moment, as if she were deciding something. "We must get those people out. It would take 4 of us weeks to clear tunnels for them," Father said. "We'll draft help. After all, we were put on this earth to help one another. Miss Whitlaw said. Father suppressed a grin. I see what can do, but better put on clothes. What? Oh, my! Miss Whitlaw was suddenly horrified to be found in her nightgown in public. Come, Robin. She took her by the hand and practically pulled her up the steps. Father shook his head affectionately. He sat down on a chest in the hall, and he and I began braiding up his queue. On his advice, we both pinned our queues into tight buns on the back of our heads. When we got outside the house, though, Father stopped. I've put my boots on the wrong feet. Sure enough, he had his left boot on his right foot and vice versa. We both laughed a little louder than the joke actually deserved, but we were just so relieved that we were still alive after the disaster. Father sat down on the sidewalk and got his boots on right. He stood up, stamping his feet back into his boots. Then we looked around. We had gone to sleep on a street crowded with buildings, some 3 or 4 stories high and crowded with people. And now many of the houses were gone, and the ones that remained were dangerously close to falling too. There was a hole in the cobblestone street about a yard wide and 20 feet long. As we watched, a cobblestone fell over the edge, clattering 10 feet to the bottom. I heard one person compare it to being on the moon. It was that kind of desolate feeling, just looking at huge hills of rubble, a brick and broken wood slats that had once been houses. On top of the piles, we would see the random collection of things that had survived the quake. Somebody's rag doll, an old bottle, a fiddle, a back of an upholstered chair, and a woman's slender wrist sticking out of the rubble as if calling for help. And then the survivors started to emerge, and I saw that there were as many hurt in mind as in body. Some people wandered out of the buildings almost naked, others still in their night clothes. I saw one man with the lather on one side of his face and the other side already clean shaven. In his hand was a lather-covered razor. One woman in a nightgown walked by carrying her crying baby by its legs, as if it were a dead chicken. Father caught her by the shoulder and gently shook the baby from her. Fix her arms, Father told me, and I set her arms so she could cradle the baby, as if the mother were a doll. Then Father put the baby back into her arms. She dumbly nodded her thanks and wandered on. Other people who had taken the time to dress had dressed in the oddest things, choosing things they wanted to save rather than what would be appropriate for disaster. I saw one shop girl go by in a ball gown with the ruffles around, crisp in the morning air. Perhaps she had saved for a year to buy it. I don't know. But I saw another man in formal tails go by. His wife carried the baby while he pushed a baby carriage filled with jewelry, a frying pan, and a candelabrum. Then along came a big, healthy man with ginger whiskers. He had slipped his trousers on over his red long johns. In his arms, he had a chest. Father tried to stop him. Please, need help. Father pointed to the mounds behind us from which the ghostly voices were calling. Be off with you, said the man. Father tried grabbing him by his blue suspenders, but the man dodged away and started running. We tried to get other survivors to help. 1 or 2 came out of their daze and started to work on the mound, clearing rocks and broken boards again. but most of them ignored Father and went on their way as if they were made of stone. Some even cursed at him. Then Miss Whitlaw and Robin joined us. Both of them were in clean dresses, with their hair braided and coiled around their ears. You would have thought they were going to church. "Please, help us save the others," Miss Whitlaw said to two sturdy young men, but they were in a hurry pushing their wheelbarrow. "Out of the way, you old bat!" "Well," sniffed Miss Whitlaw as they trundled past. You Sunday Christians," she called after them, as if that were the worst thing she could think of. She stood for a moment in the street, fingering the ends of her shawl. Then she turned around with a determined set to her jaw. "Mr. Lee, I think we are going to have to use a more forceful argument than moral persuasion." With that, she marched back into her house. Father scratched his head. "What kind of that?" he asked Robin. She shrugged. "Maybe we'll pay them?" Miss Whitlaw came out a moment later with one of her heavy wooden kitchen chairs. She set it down in front of Father. "Please break this, Mr. Lee." Father shrugged and grasped the chair. He lifted up high over his head and brought it down with a loud, splintering crash. Miss Whitlaw sifted through the broken wood. She handed one chair leg to Robin, one to me, and one to Father. She waved her own chair leg like a club. "There never was anything like a swat across the fundament to wake up a sluggish conscience." She pointed her club across the street. "You take that side, Mr. Lee, and I'll take this. Don't let anyone through." "What about your boarders?" "Those ancient rabbits are packing their bags and running away," Miss Whitlaw sniffed. "They're too old to help." It was a wonder to watch Miss Whitlaw sail up the block and gather people behind her like a hen collecting her chicks. In her gentlest but firmest way, she gathered up the surviving demons and set them in work crews to clearing the mounds from which people were calling. Watching her with open admiration, Father shook his head. Now just look at her. For myself, I could not help thinking that she had missed her vocation as a Shanghaier. The next moment I learned why we had clubs. A demon came toward us in a suit and balancing 3 hats on his head. 2 were derbies, and the last was a top hat. In either hand he had a suitcase. His eyes glanced up continually towards his hats. "Please help," Father asked him. "Go on with you," the man said, and tried to push past. Father shoved the end of his club into the demon's chest. "You help!" The demon dropped his suitcases and swung at Father, but Father ducked easily. He clubbed the demon lightly on the back of his head. The demon grunted and fell to his knees. Father raised his club menacingly. The demon held up his hand. All right. Just don't hurt the hats. Watch where you're stepping." "You go over there." Father pointed to where Miss Whitlaw stood supervising one reluctant work crew. The demon picked up his suitcases while Father picked up his hats, dusted them off, and set them on his head one by one. I don't think the demons were necessarily bad for not wanting to help others. They might have been scared, or so shocked they could not really know how selfish they were being. Now that there were other demons actually helping to save the trapped demons, we did not seem to have as much trouble as before. Some demons were glad to pitch in, though we still had to use the clubs on some others. When we had work crews at every mound from which there was a voice, about 50 people in all, we tucked our clubs into our belts and joined them. Miss Whitlaw had managed to salvage shovels, pickaxes, and crowbars from the various places for at least 12 workers. The rest of us used our hands or the ends of boards. Father deliberately chose to work on one mound which stood under a wooden wall. It was the last wall of the tenement. one of the buildings he had worked in, and at any moment the wall threatened to collapse. When I climbed up the hill of rubble to stand beside him, he turned to me. "You work somewhere else," he told me. But I figured I had as much right to make a fool of myself as he did. I picked up a rock and sent it clattering down the slope of the hill-like mound. Father tapped me on the shoulder. "Did you hear me, boy? You go someplace else." "The faster we can clear this stuff away, the sooner we can leave this mound. Maybe we can even get away before the wall collapses." Father grinned suddenly. "You're getting as unruly as a demon." He slapped me on the back, and together we went to work. As we worked to clear the mound, we saw 5 old demons and demonesses hobbled down the steps of Miss Whitlaw's house. There were suitcases in their hands, and some had to use canes to walk. They all had the same panicky look on their faces. It was the first time I had ever really seen them, and Robin was right when she told me they were enough to curdle milk. I felt sorry for her having to sit at the table with those old bags. I went back to help clearing the mound. It was a little bit like playing jackstraws, where you toss all the straws down in a pile and then try to take one away without disturbing the others. There's a kind of science to freeing the demons from the mound. A building does not collapse completely. There are little pockets inside the mound where the people are trapped. The trick is to not dig away the whole mound, but to work tunnels to those pockets. But you have to be careful not to make the mound collapse on that pocket or you. We picked up bricks, the rock-like broken bits of concrete blocks, the wooden boards, and Miss Whitlaw was everywhere, encouraging here, helping there. I wondered again at the strength within her slender body. About an hour after we started, Miss Whitlaw came over with Robin in tow. All our sweating faces were covered with the fine film of dust. We all looked like the mountain trolls who live deep, deep within the earth. "Moonshadow, you and Robin make some sandwiches and hot tea. We'll all be needing a break." I glanced up at the tottering wall. "It's all right," Father told me. "We're almost finished here." We had already pulled out 4 people from the mound. Only one of them had any injury, and that was a broken leg. Robin and I went around to the back. We were going to try and wash our hands and faces at the outdoor pump, but no matter how much we primed the handle, no water would come out. So we decided to use the one in Robin's kitchen. But the indoor pump was dry too. There was only the steady creak, creak, creak as we took turns working the handle. "That's funny," she said. "It's never been this slow before." "What do we use for water?" I asked. "Get the water from the pitchers in the rooms," Robin said. There was a pitcher of water and a wash basin in each bedroom for washing up. She wagged a finger at me. "And don't let me catch you wasting any of it by washing your face." "I wouldn't think of it," I said, though I really had been. It was a good thing that Miss Whitlaw had just baked the other day, so there was plenty of white, fresh, sweet-tasting bread. For filler, we had ham and some of the fermented cow's milk that the demons called cheese, but that I always thought of as stuff made out of a cow's pale urine. It sure smelled like old urine to me. Luckily, there were also a lot of jellied preserves. Robin carried the sandwiches out on trays. I lugged the pail of water with the pitcher. As the people quit working to gather around, Robin warned them that it was all the water we had until the pump started working, so they were to go easy. Father paused, his sandwich in his hand. "What's the matter?" I asked him. He seemed troubled. "Nothing," he said, and went back to eating. After breakfast, we went back to work. By that time, we had saved about 20 people. Poor Macy and Jack had not been among them. Their bodies were still somewhere in the ruins of their tenement. We had put the 3 injured demons on makeshift stretchers made out of blankets and long boards we salvaged from the ruins, and taken them into Miss Whitlaw's house, which was the only standing intact on the block. Then she had sent one of the neighbor boys, one of my former tormentors, after a doctor. We're going to pause there and see what else happens with this earthquake. I can't believe it. I'm so glad that they're okay. So sad, though, and so much destruction. We'll see how this takes a turn in our plot as we read tomorrow.